Coming up on Talking Points, the White House sends its top diplomat back to the Middle East as war in the region escalates.
Plus, Trump on trial, the former president turned sworn witness in the case that could cost him millions, what he said on the stand.
And abortion access on the ballot. We'll go around the country for key races to keep an eye on. Talking Points starts right now.
Good evening and welcome into Talking Points. I'm Ericka Love.
And I'm Jake Morel. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
It's been almost a month since the Israeli-Hamas war started. Secretary of State Antony Blinken wrapped up a jam-packed Middle East tour today.
Blinken went to promote a pause in violence so that Gazans could get humanitarian aid. Talking Points anchor Olivia Maniscalco is in studio to tell us how it went. Olivia?
Jake, the short answer is it did not go great. Now, if you look on your screen, those are the places he traveled to meet with the world leaders. Blinken started in Israel, then moved to Jordan, followed by a surprise trip to the West Bank. He then moved to Cyprus, Iraq, and the Turkish capital of Ankara, all of this in a slightly extended weekend. Blinken was unable to reach a regional consensus on how to best ease civilians suffering in Gaza. In Tel Aviv, he tried to get the following point across to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
We need to do more to protect Palestinian civilians. We've been clear that as Israel conducts its campaign to defeat Hamas, how it does so matters. It matters because it's the right and lawful thing to do. It matters because failure to do so plays into the hands of Hamas.
Netanyahu is refusing to consider the U.S.'s proposal for a pause on attacks on Hamas long enough for vital aid to be given to Gazans. Over in the West Bank, Blinken met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. They discussed what will come next for the territory once the conflict is over, Blinken stressing that it will be very important that Palestinians get to have a main say in what happens next for their territory. The talks in Iraq mostly consisted of Blinken pleading that Iranian allied militias in the country halt their attacks. After all that, though, the conflict continues to worsen and Gaza faces its third telecommunications blackout of the war.
You know, Olivia, you mentioned a lot of the talks focus on what will happen when the conflict is over, but is there even an end in sight?
Jake, not right now. No, there seems to be no end in sight. I mean, just today, the Israeli army severed northern Gaza from the rest of the besieged territory as it pounded it with airstrikes. This means that they are moving in onto the ground. That means urban warfare is going to start. Already, we have seen over 10,000 deaths and multiple hundreds of hostages. That number is only going to increase when urban fighting begins. Along with that, Hezbollah has said that once Israel decides to start fighting on the ground, that they would consider, joining, giving even more of their army to the cause, giving more of their army to Hamas. So all of this combined, it does not look like there's much of an end in sight. It is definitely progress that Antony Blinken went over there and he talked to a lot of the leaders and they all agreed that humanitarian aid is necessary, except for Prime Minister Netanyahu, of course. But as of now, it does not seem like there is an end in sight in this 75-year-old conflict.
Olivia Maniscalco, thank you. The House of Representatives is condemning anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on college campuses. The resolution passed with bipartisan support is the latest effort by Congress to respond to the October 7th terrorist attacks in Israel. College leaders have struggled to respond to campus protests and an uptick in hateful acts against Jewish students. Lawmakers condemned the show of support for Hamas and Hezbollah by some student organizations and called on law enforcement to protect Jewish students by using existing civil rights laws. Congresswoman Kathy Manning spoke about the issue on the House floor.
College and university leaders have a moral responsibility to make clear that they reject hatred, violence, and anti-Semitism, to hold those responsible for these acts accountable, and to prevent a hostile and intimidating environment for Jewish students, faculty, and staff.
And speaking of Congress, the House also passed a bill on Thursday providing $14 billion in aid to Israel while also cutting the same amount from IRS funding.
The Congressional Budget Office says that bill would actually raise the deficit by nearly $27 billion. That's because the cuts to the IRS would lower tax revenues, which contradicts the goal of offsetting the cost. Jake, obviously House Republicans were unhappy with this estimate because they often talk about wanting to lower the deficit. It seems like this bill does the exact opposite.
Yeah, you know, House Republicans and, Republicans in the Senate always sounding alarm about the deficit. Steve Scalise yesterday saying that military leaders have told him that the greatest threat is the deficit and not a foreign country. But newly elected Speaker Mike Johnson not seeming to totally grasp the fact that without the tax revenue, they can't lower the deficit. And he was talking about that on Capitol Hill earlier this week.
Be careful, everybody be careful. We're trying.
Were you surprised by the CBO score, sir?
Not surprised at all. Only in Washington, when you cut spending, do they call it an increase in the deficit.
Ericka, one of the other interesting pieces of this bill is the lack of aid to Ukraine. That was a key element of the request from President Biden, even some Senate Republicans like Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, and Jake, it's interesting about this because you have U.S. citizens saying to the GOP, you'll fund wars overseas, but you won't push for funding for domestic spending on policies, on healthcare, things like that. And you have President Zelensky over in Ukraine who's arguing that the war's not over and we still need your support. It's not that Israel doesn't need it, but you have to find a way to work together with all of us at the same time. Listen to what he had to say about Putin.
We are not ready to give our freedom to this terrorist Putin. That's it. That's why we are fighting. That's it.
And it's one of those situations where it leaves out the aid for Gaza. And so President Biden feels very struck by this issue, but there's so much more to talk about this. For right now, we're going to toss it over to Ben Bassick tomorrow about the elections and what's going on around the country.
Thanks, guys. When we come back, I'll have the key races to watch on Election Day tomorrow. Stay with us.
Here's to the straggly ones, the lopsided ones, the first ones, the I miss my beard ones. But hey, I look good with this ones. But no way he's grown that in the weak ones. The black, brown, red, and gray ones. That one. The itchy ones. The never forgotten ones. The ones grown by Dad. The ones grown for Dad. The started late ones. The absolutely filthy ones. The drawn on ones. The finger ones. The pin ones. The I nearly didn't do it this year ones. And the yeah, why not ones. They all raise awareness, raise funds, start conversations, and save lives. Because whatever you grow will save a bro. Learn more at Movember.com.
Welcome back to Talking Points. Tomorrow is Election Day, and while we're still a year away from the presidential race, there are still some important races to watch out for. Let's bring in our newest Talking Points analyst, Ben Bassick. Ben, let's start in Ohio. A pretty big abortion referendum there might be very telling of what we see in the 2024 presidential election. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so tomorrow we have two ballot initiatives in the state of Ohio. First, we have issue 1, which would enshrine the right to abortion and reproductive care past the point of viability into the Ohio state Constitution. Now, that term fetal viability is one widely debated among experts, hospitals, and care providers, which is why opponents of issue 1 held that special election back in August as a preemptive action that would have changed the threshold to amend the state constitution. That failed, and now Republicans are arguing that issue 1 simply goes too far. Infringing on parental rights and providing unlimited, unrestricted access to abortion. Those are two key talking points that Governor Mike DeWine has referenced in ads and interviews recently. Let's take a listen.
Abortion measures generally have not done well in the post-Dobbs decision after the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe. Are you worried about the backlash on Republicans next week in your state?
No, if you look at issue 1, it's a radical proposal, and whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, it just goes much, much too far.
Now, unlike issue 1, which is a constitutional amendment, issue 2 is an initiated statute, which would allow recreational use of marijuana in the state of Ohio. Now, that could be amended or repealed by the state legislature in the future.
Ben, so interesting, very telling of two things that have been argued from sort of a culture war standpoint for years now. The abortion referendum, important thing to note, the pro-choice advocates have outspent the pro-life advocates in Ohio by about 20 million. They've had some pretty notable ads on TV that if you take one click on Twitter, you might see some of those. But moving ahead and staying on the topic of abortion, but moving ahead to the state house election in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin trying to get that double majority there so that he may be able to place restrictions on abortion. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so right now, Republican Governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, has half control of the state legislature, Democrats in control of the state Senate. If Republicans are able to sweep both houses tomorrow, Youngkin could move forward with his proposal of an abortion ban after the 15th week of pregnancy. A pretty extreme measure compared to other states we've seen thus far. Now, a lot of money is tied up in that campaign, spending $46 million to be exact on both sides of the aisle. It really proves that in a post-Roe America, when the federal government does not have those regulatory powers over abortion, people care about state elections. So we'll have to see if those concerns and that money will translate to the ballot box tomorrow.
You know, Ben, that's a great point there about state elections. This is getting so much national attention, so much funding, a lot of spending for what is a state election, and not as much as direct as some of those referendums that we're seeing in Ohio tomorrow, one that we saw in Kansas, but still big national implications. Now, moving ahead to the Kentucky governor, talking about national implications, a lot of people talking about Andy Beshear and Daniel Cameron, either of them being on potentially a national ticket for their respective parties if they are to win tomorrow. But Beshear trying to keep his Democratic governorship afloat in a deep red state. So far, he's been able to do that. He's been one of the most popular governors with Republicans, most popular Democratic governors with Republicans in the country. He's running on his handling of COVID and natural disasters. He is breaking from the Democratic Party on things like broadband, and he's breaking from them on Biden, trying his best not to bring Biden up in the state. Biden has a low approval rating right now. He's trying not to connect the two of them. Teachers, a big part of the vote for both of them. Bevan, the governor in 2019, lost that ballot, some say based on Beshear's ability to get that vote. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, so right now, another key demographic, especially in the Kentucky race, is younger voters. And we saw that with high-profile celebrities joining the campaign trail with Beshear, like Jack Harlow. He's visiting a lot of universities, University of Kentucky, Western Kentucky University, University of Louisville. It's a key demographic they know they have to win over, not just for the Kentucky governor's race, but especially going into the upcoming 2024 presidential election.
Yeah, Jack Harlow, he gets the people going for sure. Ben, congrats on your Talking Points debut. We'll be following all of these races for sure. Ericka?
Thanks, Jake. Moving to Manhattan, former President Donald Trump took this witness stand today in his civil fraud trial, and it was quite a spectacle. Trump railed against the judge and claimed his properties were actually undervalued. New York State Attorney General Letitia James is arguing that Trump oversold his assets to banks in order to get better terms on loans. James says despite Trump's denials, the facts will prove her case in the end. Let's bring in our Peter Barry, who's been following this for us. Peter, what happened today in court?
So, Ericka, Trump is no newcomer to testifying in court. He testified at least 8 times since 1986. But today in court, he was rather unruly, leading to Judge Arthur Ergaron saying that this isn't a political rally and to actually answer the questions. But his testimony was very similar to his sons, Eric and Donald Jr., basically blaming the third-party accountants for falsifying and inflating these numbers. But Eric and Donald Jr. were also saying that the Trump name also holds a lot of cachet within New York City. And Trump even today said his company assets were undervalued. But Judge Ergaron has already ruled that they are liable of fraud. So now it's just going to determine the punishment, whether it will be a $250 million fine or they will be totally barred from New York State business.
Well, the thing that everyone's been talking about, of course, is how abnormal it is for one of the top leading candidates to be on a witness stand right now, a big witness stand at that. You mentioned political rallies and all of that. How is it that the numbers are being presented today, and what is that suggesting about his general record as a successful businessman?
So Trump has been accused of falsifying his records for a very long time, at least 10 years now. But I want to take a look at one of these graphics with Mar-a-Lago here. He was falsifying the record for Mar-a-Lago at $500 million, but an appraisal for Mar-a-Lago said it was roughly around $18 million. But the campaign finances here, as I said, he might have a $250 million fine on top of his head. So he raised around $45 million in the third quarter. So donors are supplying him with a lot more money. But in this case, most Trump supporters have already made up their mind to vote for him. And roughly around 75 million people voted for him in 2020, so we could see more in 2024.
Well, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, the legal strategy here, right? Well, you just mentioned things that are related to Mar-a-Lago. That doesn't even count violating his gag order. That's a whole nother set of money there. The tactics we saw today from him on the stand was essentially sparring with the judge. Will that be helpful for him going forward?
So you want to try and have goodwill with the legal team, but with this case, Arthur Ergaron has already found his verdict. And Republican primary voters do not like Arthur Ergaron. So he's very against Trump. He's apparently very biased, as Trump's words. But we will know whether this case will actually impact him when the election is coming up less than a year from today, and if he's the Republican nominee.
Peter, thank you so much. And coming up, a huge endorsement in the race for president. Find out who the governor of Iowa is supporting right after this.
Fancy pants peanut butter? A big screen television? You haven't even bought a sofa yet. A motorcycle? When your father finds out, he's gonna flip his shoes with 2 buckles? What do you even need 2 buckles for? Mr. Big Shot. Buying whiskey shots for everybody in the bar. From the looks of it, I'd say nobody even remembers. Feed the pig.
I know Donald Trump and a lot of his people have been focusing on things like footwear. I'll tell you this. If Donald Trump can summon the balls to show up to the debate, I'll wear a boot on my head. This is a time for substance.
Welcome back. That was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis mocking the former president for not showing up to the third GOP debate on Wednesday. Let's bring in Talking Points analyst Harrison Coulter for more on this. Harrison, despite Ron DeSantis' best efforts at coming at Trump for not coming on Wednesday night, who and what else can we expect to see on the debate?
Ericka, Jake, good evening. Thank you guys for having me on. So we're going to see 5 different candidates for the debate on Wednesday in Miami, Florida. We're going to be looking at New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. We're going to see Vivek Ramaswamy. We're also going to be seeing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who you just mentioned, as well as former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and finally South Carolina Governor Tim Scott. So all of them going to be fighting for that Republican nomination. Of course, again, no former President Donald Trump, who is leading the vote. 538 polls currently has him at 58.4%, way ahead of everybody else. So he's definitely going to have a big part of this talk, even if he's not, in the debate.
And Harrison, speaking of those Trump polling numbers, we've seen 2 GOP debates already. They haven't changed the fact that Trump is still the front runner by a mile. Why will this debate be any different?
This is going to be different because this one's with NBC. That's a big part. The last 2 were with Fox, more of a right-leaning viewership there. You see NBC, a lot of independents watching NBC, so there's going to be a lot of people looking at that. And you also see you see Lester Holt, you see Christian Welker, and you see Hugh Hewitt, all the moderators for this debate. They're going to play their role. And there's also going to be less candidates than we've seen in the previous 2 debates. So I think that'll give everyone more opportunity to say what they believe in and hopefully swing some voters in their favor.
And Harrison, something that's likely to come up on the debate stage is a huge endorsement that's supposed to be happening tonight. Iowa's very popular Governor Kim Reynolds is making a big endorsement. Who is she supporting?
So Kim Reynolds will be favoring Ron DeSantis for Florida governor. That's going to be huge because Iowa is the first caucus on January 15th. And that's going to be a huge thing. I mean, that could potentially sway a lot of voters in the future, even through Iowa. And Kim Reynolds doing this, saying that she does not want Trump to win in 2024, and knowing that Ron DeSantis is number 2 in the polls right now, that he's the guy she has to go back. And she's going to do that, and she hopes that he'll pull out and take down Donald Trump.
I think it's going to be a very interesting race overall, especially given this big endorsement that I think none of us saw coming. Harrison, thank you. And turning now to Capitol Hill, controversial Congressman George Santos will stay in the House of Representatives for now. An effort to expel him from Congress failed last week, with 31 Democrats voting to save the lawmaker while his criminal trial and House Ethics Committee investigation play out. They say that ejecting him before that process ends would open the door for the GOP to boot anyone they don't like.
The effort to kick Santos out of the House was led by a group of Republicans from New York who are trying to distance themselves from their colleague who has admitted to fabricating much of his life story. And another member of Congress who's created quite a stir among his colleagues is Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville.
For the past 9 months, he's blocked approval on military promotions over the Pentagon's policy on abortion travel. Talking Points analyst Luke Welch has been following the story for us. Luke, tell us how this all began.
Well, Ericka, it was last summer when a historic judicial battle led to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and with it, the right falling to the states to decide who has access to an abortion. Since then, many organizations have been fighting to support pregnant mothers, including the Pentagon. A few months after the decision, the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin issued an order stating that pregnant military members who live in abortion-restricted states will be reimbursed for their trips to terminate the fetus. However, the GOP did not react kindly to the Secretary's sentiment. Members of the Senate Committee on Armed Services took to protest this order, led by none other than Alabama's Tommy Tuberville. A senator from the neighboring state in which Dobbs versus Jackson emerged from. For 10 months now, Tuberville has blocked over 350 military promotions. And when asked why or if he will stop, he said this.
So why hold them up? But it's the only way I can get their attention. And I've told you all along, I hate to have to do this. But somebody has got to listen to us.
But an important question to be asked here is who exactly is us? The GOP Congress members representing states that have blocked abortion access? Well, here's what a few of them had to say about what they call, quote-unquote, Tuberville's power trip.
You did that. She had nothing to do with this policy.
An abuse of the powers we have as senators to say if there's something we vehemently disagree with, that we're going to use that power to hold up the promotion of over 350 men and women in our military.
I am unapologetically pro-life in conviction and in deed, and to hold responsible, effectively, 300 nominated patriots, and by extension to undermine the safety and security of the American people during this perilous time just doesn't make any sense to me.
Now, Tuberville referenced the taxpayer dollars at stake, but his opposition in citing how his party is to blame for his constituents' money being used for these travel expenses. So, Jake and Ericka, with all that's happening in Congress right now, it's hard to tell if the leaders of the Republican Party are properly conserving public funding as well as congressional time.
Luke, how are these delays affecting Senate and military progress, and what can we expect with the future of these nominations?
Well, Jake, with all that's happening in Congress right now, these delays imposed by Senator Tuberville seem to be the cherry on the sundae when it comes to congressional chaos. The U.S. Senate are currently attempting to induct each military member one by one, leader, instead of the shortcut that Tuberville is blocking. Now, Congress is desperately trying to divert financial and military attention to the war in Israel and Ukraine, as mentioned earlier in our show. However, Tuberville does not seem to be worried about these implications, stating he's confident in the ability of the U.S. military to aid its allies.
My hold is not affecting readiness. If senators want to vote on these nominees one by one, I'm all in. I'm happy to do that.
Now, Tuberville also would say that there may be a delay in his planning guidance, and he's referring to the Secretary of Defense there. But there is little doubt about General Smith's ability to lead effectively. The Secretary of Defense would respond and say that this guidance would be crucial in the military's defense. Ericka?
And Luke, what exactly does this mean for Tuberville's future in the Senate leadership or in 2024 in general?
Well, Ericka, it seems like Tuberville's allies have dropped, as we saw in the video before, just like he was dropped from Alabama's football program after his offensive strategy struggles led him to losses against crucial adversaries. Now, we hope that these strategy struggles do not translate into United States military. And in terms of his Senate leadership, I think Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, as well as Tuberville's constituents, will remember how he wasted government efforts in such a crucial time. That's all I have for now, Jake and Ericka. Back to you.
Little football knowledge there, Luke. I love it. But up next, we'll have one final point before Election Day. Stay with us.
Jason, let's go see your room.
What do you think? We kept it a little spare, so you can decorate it how you like.
Dinner.
Go. Excellent. Cyprus. Yeah, I saw you guys out there.
Welcome back to Talking Points. Before we go tonight, there's one final point to share.
As we bring one relatively small election cycle to a close, tomorrow another one begins, and in 2024 there are growing concerns of political violence.
After the last presidential election, a study by the Brennan Center found that 1 in 3 election officials feel unsafe because of their job. Nearly 1 in 5 listed threats to their lives as a job-related concern.
It's a challenge every day, says Lisa Dealey, who oversees elections in the city of Philadelphia. The job has changed so much because every day you're getting the kitchen sink thrown at you and all the vegetables in the refrigerator and all the sheets and towels in the linen closet, end quote.
And these are just the people who count the votes and tell us who our lawmakers are going to be. For those lawmakers themselves, their job becomes even harder. During interviews for a new biography by The Atlantic's McKay Coppins, Mitt Romney opened up about the creeping threat of political violence. He says that members of Congress voted against removing Trump from office, the Capitol riot, to avoid his wrath and further violence from his supporters.
And the 2012 nominee for president turned party outcast says he fears for his own safety too. There really are deranged people among us, Romney said to his biographer, and in his home state of Utah, quote, people carry guns, end quote. Coppins writes that Romney's comments beg the question, how long can a democracy last when its elected leaders live in fear of physical violence from their constituents.
And this week, the trial process begins for the man who attacked the 82-year-old husband of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It was a shocking moment for our country, and yet, here's how former President Trump responded to the incident.
And we'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi, who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job.
Well, that's all the time we have for you on Talking Points tonight. I'm Jake Morel.
And I'm Ericka Love. Good night.